Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to dive deep into something that has confused many for a long time. We've all experienced that moment where someone you care about, someone who's deeply craving your attention, your presence, your love, suddenly goes silent. And you're left wondering why. Fear is one of the most powerful forces that can prevent someone from reaching out, even when they crave connection. It's a hidden barrier that many people struggle with, even if they don't realize it. Fear of rejection is not just about the potential hurt of being turned away, but about the way it can shake their sense of self-worth, their identity, and the way they see themselves in the world. This fear can be so overwhelming that it keeps them locked in a state of hesitation, even when they deeply desire to connect with someone. For some, the fear of rejection is rooted in past experiences. Maybe they've been hurt before, or perhaps they've faced criticism or rejection that has left a lasting impact on their emotional well-being. Every time they think about reaching out, the fear of reliving that pain surfaces, and they hesitate. This hesitation is not about you. It's not about whether you'll accept them or not, it's about their own internal struggles. They've built a protective wall around themselves, and that wall is reinforced every time they withdraw. Even though they want to tear it down, they feel as though the risk is too great, and so they stay silent, trapped in their own fear. This fear also comes from the uncertainty of how you will respond. The person who craves your attention may not be sure of what you want or how you feel. They might be consumed with the idea that their actions could be misunderstood or that they could push you away in ways they can't predict. The mind can play tricks in these situations, amplifying the what-ifs to such an extent that they become paralyzing. What if they don't feel the same way? What if reaching out makes things awkward? What if I ruin what little connection we have left? Asterisk. These questions swirl in their mind, creating an emotional storm that makes the act of reaching out seem like an insurmountable challenge. But the truth is that the more they avoid taking action, the more this fear grows, until it consumes them entirely. They may crave connection, but the thought of facing the unknown consequences keeps them stuck. It's important to understand that the person's fear is not necessarily a reflection of their feelings towards you. In fact, it may indicate just how much they care. Their silence could be a sign that they care so much that the idea of being vulnerable and facing rejection is simply too much for them to handle. The fear of putting themselves out there and risking emotional exposure is powerful. In some cases, they may feel as though they are not worthy of the connection they desire, or that they don't deserve the kind of love and attention they're seeking. Additionally, fear of rejection can be a learned response. For some, it's a defense mechanism that has been built over years of experiences, whether it's been from childhood, previous relationships, or social interactions. When someone is constantly met with rejection or criticism, they begin to internalize those experiences and start to believe that reaching out will only result in more pain. Over time, this belief becomes ingrained in their psyche, and it influences every decision they make regarding connection. Their desire to protect themselves from further hurt outweighs their need for closeness. It's also important to consider that fear of rejection can be connected to a lack of self-confidence. When someone doesn't fully believe in their own worth or value, they may assume that others won't either. This lack of belief in themselves can make the prospect of reaching out feel like a high-risk venture, even if they desperately crave the connection. The silence becomes a way to protect their fragile sense of self-esteem from potential damage. They may fear that any action they take will only confirm their worst fear, that they aren't worthy of love, affection, or attention. But ultimately, fear of rejection isn't something that can be easily overcome. It's not just a simple matter of deciding to reach out. It's a deeply emotional and psychological barrier that requires time, self-reflection, and inner growth to dismantle. It's not something they can control in the moment, which is why they retreat into silence instead of taking the risk of vulnerability. The desire to connect might be there, but the fear of rejection feels far more powerful. Waiting for the perfect moment can often be a powerful form of procrastination. It's a trap that many fall into when they feel uncertain or unsure about taking action. In relationships, this perfect moment usually revolves around the idea that everything must align just right before they can make a move. The timing must be flawless, the circumstances must be ideal, and the environment should feel safe. But the truth is, this pursuit of perfection only delays what needs to be done and, in many cases, prevents any progress from being made at all. The idea of waiting for the right time stems from a fear of failure, of making the wrong move, or of acting too hastily. It's a mindset that tells us that if we just hold off a little longer, things will somehow work out on their own. But that's simply not how life works. If we wait for everything to fall into place, we may find ourselves waiting forever. The perfect moment never truly comes because perfection is a subjective idea that changes with every passing day. What seems perfect today might feel inadequate tomorrow. And the longer we wait, the more doubts and uncertainties creep in, making it even harder to act when the moment finally does arrive. In the context of relationships, waiting for the perfect moment is a form of self-sabotage. Many people tell themselves that they need to wait until they feel more confident, or until they have everything figured out, or until they're in a better position emotionally or physically to reach out. But this kind of thinking traps them in a cycle of perpetual inaction. The longer they wait, the more they convince themselves that the time isn't right. They keep postponing their desires, telling themselves, maybe next time, maybe when things are better, or maybe when I've got more control. In the meantime, life continues to pass them by. When we constantly search for the perfect moment, we're really avoiding the discomfort of stepping outside our comfort zone. Reaching out to someone, especially when we have strong feelings, requires vulnerability. And vulnerability is inherently uncomfortable. The idea of putting yourself out there, especially when you're unsure of how the other person will respond, is daunting. The fear of rejection, the fear of being misjudged, and the fear of making a mistake all play into this desire to wait until the right moment. But here's the paradox. By waiting for everything to be just right, we avoid the very thing that could bring us closer to what we want taking action. What often happens when people wait for the perfect moment is that they lose momentum. Their initial impulse or desire fades, and they find themselves stuck in a state of paralysis. The more they hesitate, the more their fear builds, and the more difficult it becomes to take that first step. They start to overthink every potential outcome, overanalyzing every small detail until the situation feels overwhelming. What was once a small decision becomes an insurmountable mountain, all because they were trying to make sure everything was ideal. But perfection is an illusion, and when we chase it, we're chasing something that doesn't exist. The more someone waits for the ideal time to act, the more they lose touch with the essence of what they truly want. They become consumed with the idea of things being perfect, but what they really need is to take imperfect action. It's about realizing that the perfect moment doesn't come by waiting, but by creating it through the decisions we make in the present. Perfection comes from the courage to act, to step forward despite uncertainties, and to embrace whatever comes next. Waiting for the perfect moment also denies the reality of how relationships truly work. They don't grow because of perfectly timed actions. They grow because of consistent effort, vulnerability, and openness. Relationships, whether personal or professional, require you to put yourself out there, to show up even when the timing doesn't feel ideal, and to embrace the messy, imperfect process of connection. When you wait for everything to be perfect, you miss the opportunity to learn, to grow, and to build a deeper connection with others. The truth is, the longer you wait for the perfect moment, the more you limit your own potential. You limit your ability to experience life fully, to learn from your mistakes, and to grow stronger in the process. Perfect timing is a myth, and by waiting for it, you're only postponing your own happiness and progress. What you truly need is the courage to take action now, even if things aren't ideal, and trust that the moment you've been waiting for will unfold as you step into it. Independence is a fundamental need that many people struggle to balance with their desire for connection. For some, the craving for personal freedom and the desire to preserve their individuality can be so strong that they are unwilling to reach out, even when they deeply care about someone. This need for autonomy often creates a silent barrier that prevents them from taking the actions they wish to take. The idea of being in a relationship, whether romantic or otherwise, can sometimes feel like a threat to their sense of self, leading them to hold back despite their longing for closeness. For many individuals, their independence is closely tied to their identity. They have spent years building a life that reflects their personal values, preferences, and goals. They have carved out a space in the world where they feel secure, in control, and free from outside influence. The thought of entering into a relationship that might demand time, energy, and compromise can feel like a loss of that autonomy. It's not that they don't want to be close to others, but the prospect of giving up pieces of themselves for the sake of a connection feels overwhelming. In their minds, relationships require sacrifices that can sometimes feel like they are trading away parts of their individuality. This desire for independence doesn't always come from a place of selfishness. It can stem from previous experiences where they may have felt stifled or controlled in past relationships. When someone has had a negative experience of losing themselves in a relationship, they may become wary of repeating the same pattern. The fear of becoming too reliant on someone else, of losing their own sense of agency, leads them to distance themselves from the very connection they crave. They may feel that in order to maintain their happiness and sense of self-worth, they need to stay independent, even if that means remaining distant or emotionally unavailable. For others, this need for independence is a reflection of their fear of vulnerability. To open up to someone else requires a certain level of emotional exposure and surrender, and that can feel incredibly risky. When they value their independence, they may perceive vulnerability as a threat to their freedom. They fear being controlled or influenced by someone else's needs and desires, so they pull away rather than risk becoming too emotionally entwined with another person. The thought of being dependent on someone else, even in a healthy and balanced way, feels like a loss of their personal power. Additionally, people who highly value their independence may also struggle with the idea of relying on others for emotional support. They may see asking for help or opening up about their feelings as a sign of weakness or a violation of their self-reliance. This mindset can prevent them from reaching out to others even when they need support or desire connection. They may want to maintain the image of being strong, self-sufficient, and unaffected by the challenges of life. To reach out would mean admitting that they are vulnerable, and that's something they may not feel comfortable doing. The desire to maintain independence can also manifest as a reluctance to become too emotionally attached. Some individuals fear that by letting someone in, they will lose control over their emotional landscape. They might feel that being in a relationship means becoming too entangled in someone else's emotions, expectations, or needs, which could detract from their own goals and ambitions. They want to preserve their personal space and emotional boundaries, which can make reaching out or connecting on a deeper level feel like a threat to their stability. However, this need for independence isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's a healthy instinct that helps individuals preserve their individuality and maintain a sense of personal integrity. The challenge lies in finding a balance between independence and connection. Healthy relationships are built on the foundation of mutual respect, where both individuals retain their autonomy while also being vulnerable and open with each other. True emotional intimacy comes not from sacrificing independence, but from the willingness to show up as your authentic self without the fear of losing who you are. For someone who values their independence, reaching out might feel like a challenge to their identity, but it doesn't have to be. In fact, it's possible to maintain independence while still being emotionally available and connected to others. The key is to understand that relationships don't have to mean losing yourself or your freedom. They can enhance your life and support your growth without requiring you to give up what makes you unique. The act of reaching out doesn't have to come at the expense of your autonomy. Instead, it can be a powerful choice that enriches your life without diminishing your sense of self. When someone craves connection but is still figuring themselves out, it creates a conflict that often leads to inaction. This internal struggle is one of the most difficult obstacles to overcome because it stems from a lack of self-awareness or clarity about what they truly want and need in their life. They might have deep emotions or desires, but they are not fully aware of what those emotions mean, how to express them, or even whether they are in a place where they can act on them. This uncertainty can make them retreat, even though they long for closeness. Instead of taking the risk to reach out and potentially face rejection, they remain silent, consumed by the confusion of their own feelings. The process of figuring oneself out can take time, and it's often not as linear or straightforward as we'd like. It can be triggered by life experiences, changing circumstances, or internal reflections that make them realize they are not yet ready to share their lives with someone else. Perhaps they've gone through a period of personal growth or transformation, and they are still adjusting to the person they've become. During this phase, they might not feel stable enough emotionally or mentally to engage in a relationship, and reaching out to someone else could feel like an added pressure when they are still trying to understand themselves. They may not want to drag anyone else into their uncertainties or emotional confusion, fearing that by involving others, they will be unfair to them or lead them on. This sense of self-discovery is crucial, but it often leads to a cycle of hesitation. They might want to reach out, but feel that they should wait until they have a better grasp of their own emotions or life situation. Until they feel settled, they might believe that they can't truly connect with anyone else because they have yet to define who they are, what they want, or what they can offer. It's not that they don't want to be close to someone, it's that they feel like they're not in a position to offer a meaningful connection until they have resolved their own internal conflicts. The process of figuring oneself out often involves deep reflection and sometimes uncomfortable introspection. They might be questioning past choices, trying to make sense of their personal values, or redefining their goals in life. This exploration of identity can leave them feeling uncertain about what they truly want, which can make the idea of reaching out to someone feel premature or misplaced. The more they think about it, the more they convince themselves that they need to get their life in order before they can be fully present with someone else. They might tell themselves that until they know exactly who they are, they will be a burden to anyone they try to connect with. At the same time, there is often a fear that if they reach out while they're still figuring themselves out, they might come across as unstable or unreliable. They worry that their own uncertainty will be projected onto the other person, or that they will be misunderstood. They might not want to be perceived as emotionally unavailable, but at the same time, they don't feel like they can offer the emotional stability and clarity that a relationship might require. This fear of being judged or misunderstood further reinforces their hesitation to make contact. Additionally, their lack of self-awareness can lead them to feel unworthy of connection. They may struggle with feelings of inadequacy or feel that they don't have enough to offer because they haven't fully figured out who they are yet. This can cause them to undervalue themselves, thinking that they need to have all the answers or have everything in order before they can allow themselves to connect with someone else. This belief becomes a barrier, preventing them from taking action even though deep down they crave intimacy and closeness. This struggle is common in the midst of personal growth. Yet it's important to realize that no one is ever truly figured out. People are constantly evolving, and part of being in a relationship is learning and growing together, accepting that we may not have all the answers, but still have the capacity to offer support, love, and connection. The fear of being incomplete or uncertain doesn't have to prevent someone from reaching out. In fact, it's often in those moments of vulnerability and uncertainty that the most genuine connections are made. The challenge lies in understanding that even if they are still figuring themselves out, they are still worthy of love, connection, and companionship. No one has all their emotional or mental puzzle pieces in place at all times, and sometimes it's through reaching out, being vulnerable, and connecting with others that we gain more clarity about ourselves. Fear of appearing desperate is a deeply ingrained emotion that often holds people back from reaching out, even when they long for connection. It's an emotion that can be rooted in societal expectations, personal insecurities, or past experiences. The idea of desperation is often equated with weakness, and this belief can be so strong that it prevents people from taking action. The fear of being perceived as desperate can lead them to keep their feelings bottled up, even when they desperately crave the emotional connection they desire. At its core, the fear of appearing desperate stems from a deep need for self-respect and dignity. Many people are taught from a young age to maintain a sense of composure and control, to never seem too eager or too emotionally invested. The idea of showing vulnerability or expressing a strong desire for connection can be seen as a loss of control. And for some, that is a fate to avoid at all costs. Desperation in their minds equals a lack of power, and so they retreat into silence rather than risk appearing weak or out of control. This fear isn't just about the way others might perceive them. It's also about how they perceive themselves. They want to feel strong and self-sufficient. And the idea of needing someone else or seeking emotional closeness can feel like a violation of that self-image. This fear is often compounded by societal messages that promote independence, self-reliance, and emotional strength. People are taught to be self-sufficient, to never need anyone, and to always maintain a sense of mystery. The idea of showing someone that you are yearning for their presence or affection can be seen as a breach of these unspoken rules. They fear that by expressing their emotions, they are giving up their personal power, and this fear of losing control prevents them from making the first move. In their minds, staying silent is a way to retain their dignity, even if it means sacrificing the opportunity for connection. Additionally, past experiences with rejection or disappointment can further fuel this fear. If someone has been hurt in the past by being too open, too eager, or too emotionally available, they may internalize the belief that being emotionally vulnerable is risky and dangerous. They may have felt dismissed or judged for showing too much interest, and this experience shapes their behavior going forward. In these situations, the fear of desperation becomes a defense mechanism. They convince themselves that by staying emotionally distant and avoiding reaching out, they can protect themselves from further pain or rejection. It becomes easier to suppress their desire for connection than to risk facing the possibility of being dismissed or judged. This fear is also closely tied to the fear of being perceived as too much. People often worry that if they express their feelings or make a move, they will be seen as overbearing or clingy. The idea of being too much can make someone second-guess themselves and retreat into silence, even though they may feel an intense need for connection. They may believe that by appearing too eager or too emotionally invested, they will push the other person away. Instead of allowing themselves to show their vulnerability, they hold back, thinking that playing it cool or remaining distant will make them more desirable or less threatening. The fear of appearing desperate can also be rooted in a deep-seated insecurity about one's own worth. If someone doesn't feel fully confident in themselves, they may fear that their desire for connection will be seen as a sign of inadequacy. They might feel that if they openly express their longing for someone, it will make them appear needy or unworthy of attention. This insecurity can make them doubt their own value, believing that the only way to maintain their dignity is by staying silent and not letting anyone see how much they care. But in reality, this fear of appearing desperate is often based on misconceptions and self-imposed limitations. Most people appreciate vulnerability, honesty, and emotional openness, and the fear of appearing desperate is often more about the way we view ourselves than about how others perceive us. In fact, by being open about our feelings and desires, we create opportunities for connection and understanding. It's only through vulnerability that we can build deep, meaningful relationships, and the fear of appearing desperate can actually prevent us from experiencing the closeness and intimacy we crave. Overcoming the fear of appearing desperate requires a shift in mindset. It's about recognizing that expressing emotions, showing interest, and taking action in the pursuit of connection are not signs of weakness, but of strength. It's about realizing that vulnerability is not a liability, but a source of power. The more we embrace our own emotions and allow ourselves to take risks, the more we create space for authentic. The fear of rejection is one of the most powerful forces that keep people from reaching out, even when they deeply desire connection. This fear can be paralyzing, affecting not only their ability to act, but also how they view themselves. It's a fear that holds people back from expressing their emotions or taking risks in relationships because the possibility of being rejected feels like a threat to their self-worth. Rejection in many ways is perceived as a personal failure, one that can be hard to recover from, leading many to avoid putting themselves in situations where they might face it. At its core, the fear of rejection is deeply tied to the need for validation. As human beings, we are wired for connection, and our sense of belonging is crucial for our emotional well-being. When we put ourselves out there, whether it's sharing our feelings or making an offer to connect with someone, we are vulnerable. This vulnerability opens us up to the possibility of being rejected, and that rejection can feel like a rejection of our very selves. It's not just about the fear of not being liked or wanted. It's about feeling as if our value is being diminished by someone else's response, or lack thereof. This fear can be so overwhelming that it leads people to retreat, choosing silence over the risk of facing the pain of rejection. The impact of rejection goes beyond the immediate emotional sting. It can have long-lasting effects on self-esteem and confidence. When someone is rejected, it can trigger feelings of inadequacy or unworthiness. They may start questioning their own value, wondering if there is something wrong with them that caused the rejection. This cycle of self-doubt can erode their confidence, making it even harder to put themselves out there in the future. Each rejection reinforces the belief that they are not enough, and over time this can create a pattern of avoiding situations where they might face rejection altogether. This fear of rejection is also fueled by past experiences. If someone has faced rejection in the past, especially if it was a painful or humiliating experience, it can create a deep-seated fear that it will happen again. The memories of past rejections can become ingrained in their psyche, causing them to avoid similar situations in the future. They may tell themselves that reaching out will only lead to more pain, and so they decide it's better to stay quiet and protect themselves. The weight of these past experiences can feel like a heavy burden, one that prevents them from taking risks and seeking the connections they desire. The fear of rejection also feeds into a desire to control the outcome. When someone is unsure about how they will be received, it's easy to feel out of control. This lack of certainty can be incredibly uncomfortable, and so people avoid taking any action that might lead to an uncertain result. The idea of being rejected can seem more daunting than staying in the safety of silence, where the outcome is already known. In their minds, by not reaching out, they can avoid the emotional discomfort that comes with rejection, even if it means missing out on a potential connection. Additionally, societal pressures can heighten this fear. We are often taught to be self-sufficient and not to show signs of weakness, and reaching out for emotional support or connection can feel like a violation of these cultural norms. The fear of being perceived as needy or desperate can prevent someone from expressing their desires or asking for what they need. They worry that showing vulnerability will make them appear weak or less worthy of attention. This fear is compounded by the belief that rejection could further confirm these negative perceptions, making it even more difficult to take the first step. However, avoiding rejection altogether can also come at a cost. The longer someone avoids taking action due to the fear of rejection, the more they deprive themselves of the chance to build meaningful relationships. By staying silent, they miss out on the opportunity to connect with others, to experience the joy of closeness, and to grow emotionally. The more they resist reaching out, the more isolated they become, reinforcing the very fear they are trying to avoid. It's important to recognize that rejection is a natural part of life, and in many ways an unavoidable aspect of human interaction. Every person has faced rejection in some form, and yet it's rarely as catastrophic as we imagine. Rejection doesn't define us. It's simply an indication that something didn't align in that particular moment or relationship. In fact, rejection can be a valuable learning experience, providing insight into what works, what doesn't, and what we truly want from others. The key is to change the way we perceive rejection, not as a reflection of our worth, but as a temporary setback that doesn't diminish our value as individuals. In conclusion, the internal battles we face, whether it's confusion about our own identity, the fear of appearing desperate, or the crippling fear of rejection, are powerful forces that prevent us from reaching out and building the meaningful connections we crave. These fears often stem from our deep-seated need for self-worth, validation, and emotional safety. Yet, in reality, they only serve to isolate us and keep us from experiencing the joy and growth that come from embracing vulnerability and taking risks. To break free from these chains, we must begin to redefine how we view ourselves and our relationships. Embracing the unknown, understanding that rejection is not a reflection of our worth, and accepting our vulnerabilities can empower us to take the leap. The truth is, the very connections we desire often lie just beyond the fear we hold. When we find the courage to step past our insecurities, we open the door to profound growth, deeper connections, and the fulfillment of our emotional needs.